Hello and welcome to the first Sustainable Space Summit. I'm Susie Imber.
And I'm Dallas Campbell. We're going to be your hosts for the next few hours. I want to say, first of all, a huge thank you to the Scottish Space Leadership Council and to everybody who's put today together. Thank you very much indeed. Big thank you as well to all of our speakers. We've got some fantastic keynote speakers for you today. We've got some wonderful panelists, but most of all, I want to say a huge thank you to you, whoever you are and wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I also want to say as well, this is a chance for us to hear your voices as we talk through various issues today. So the Q&A function will be open. We'd love to hear some of your questions. And also the chat function will be open. And we're going to put up various links to websites and other things that we'll be talking about today as well for you to kind of peruse at your leisure. Susie, why are we here?
We're here because a few months ago, the Sustainable Space Challenges campaign put out a call for questions related to the sustainability of the space sector. And we had loads and loads of entries from people across the country in all different areas. And we have a panel of industry experts who went through this list of questions.
They did. They went through the list of questions. And what we've done is we've whittled it down to what was kind of judged to be the three most important areas for the space sector in relation to sustainability and environmental issues. And those three questions are really going to be the focus of what we're going to be talking today on the summit. But
spoiler alert, we haven't actually solved any of these challenges yet. We're hoping this is just the beginning, and we're hoping to begin a conversation about some of these areas.
And I want to say it's all really easy. We've identified the problems and the solutions, but we've only got the questions for you today. Hopefully this will be the beginnings of a conversation. But let's have a little look at the state of play today. So we're going to start off with some keynotes. We're going to be meeting the judges a little bit later on at around about 3:30. These are all UK times, Scottish times, I should say. Then we're going to be looking at the outcomes of some of the work streams, followed by the ESA Sustainability Charter at 4:25. Then the value of space panel at 16:40. And this is really interesting, I think, Susie. We've got it's an example of a Scottish sector that's really embraced environmental issues, and that's the Scotch Whisky Association Sustainability. It's a lot of S's. Journey today. So that's going to be a bit later on. And then hopefully we should wrap up by round about 5:30. Fingers crossed. We never wrap up on time.
Well, hopefully today
hopefully we'll sort of keep to time. But we're going to start off. I'm really excited. We've got an opening address by the First Minister of Scotland, the Right Honourable Nicola Sturgeon.
I want to send my best wishes to everyone taking part in today's summit. I want to thank Daniel, Christina and the rest of Scotland's Space Leadership Council for the work that you've all done to organise this. I also want to thank those who have taken part in the challenges. As today's event shows, Scotland places great importance on our space sector. That's why, for example, we are developing our own launch capabilities for satellites in Scotland. Indeed, 5 of the 7 proposed spaceport sites in the UK will be in Scotland. But we know that as we build on the sector's strengths, we must also focus on sustainability. Amongst their many benefits, space technologies will have an increasingly important role in the fight against climate change. But the sector must continue to reduce its own environmental impact. That's maybe a particularly vital concern right now for Scotland. It's 5 months, of course, until COP26 will take place in Glasgow. And at that time, the eyes of the world will be on Scotland. So we are determined to show that we are leading by example in the transition to net zero. Today's summit is a great opportunity to discuss the role the space industry as an important and growing sector in Scotland can play in that. It's also a chance to discuss the challenges we need to address along the way, helped, I hope, by the ideas that the challenge participants have produced. So I'm really delighted that you're all taking part. I hope you all find today's discussions informative and productive. And I very much look forward to working with all of you to build a stronger, more sustainable space sector in the months and years to come. Thank you all very much indeed.
Great. So following that introduction, we'd now like to introduce Ivan McKee. He's the Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism and Enterprise at the Scottish Government. Over to you, Ivan.
Great, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you today, although I am following straight after my boss, the First Minister. But I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Sustainable Space Summit organised by the Scottish Space Leadership Council, and a huge thank you to them. And it's an extremely exciting time to be part of the space sector in Scotland. For those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in the sector for the past 3 years in my ministerial responsibility, and I was delighted following our election and my reappointment as a minister to retain responsibility for the sector, because it's hugely energising and a tremendous sector to work with. The Scottish Government have reinforced our commitment to the space sector through including the sector in our election manifesto, with a real focus on space for good, and we continue to work with the sector to develop launch sites, grow manufacturing jobs and enhance our data analytics capability. And the summit today is bringing together parties to accelerate action towards and beyond the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's really inspiring to see the sector taking a leading role in working towards a more sustainable future, and I'm particularly encouraged with the approach taken by the sector, which is really to face up to potential negative impacts and to work together across industry, academia, government and environmental groups to agree a collective journey forward. In Scotland, our ambition is to be Europe's leading space nation by becoming the first country in Europe to provide an end-to-end solution for small satellites, and we aim to capture £4 billion of the global space market and grow our total employment in the sector to 20,000 over the next 9 years. And launch is a missing piece of the jigsaw, and once achieved will form the backbone of Scotland's vibrant space supply chain. Opening up access to space and space data will bring so many benefits to society. It will help, amongst other things, to support the effective monitoring of climate change. However, it's not enough to simply develop launch capability and grow the space sector with no regard for our wider environmental and societal responsibilities. And the process of reaching orbit must be pursued in a way that contributes to our commitments to end our contribution to global climate change by 2045. And of course, none of this is achievable without close collaboration across business, academia and government. And we are very pleased to work alongside the Scottish Space Leadership Council and other partners to achieve this. And by working together, we know we can develop an environment that's supportive to the growth and success of the industrial space businesses. Those ambitions are already on the way to being realised. Our space sector is already punching above its weight, and we're keen to capitalise on our impressive space economy. Scotland's space sector has been growing annually by 10% in recent years. We account for almost a third of the value across the whole of the UK space manufacturing output, and the city of Glasgow makes more commercial small satellites than any other city in the world outside of California. We have expertise in data gathering and analysis, and Scotland is a data-driven capital of Europe, hosting the largest centre for informatics in Europe and having more than 170 data science companies. We also have leading research institutions with relevant expertise. And alongside our downstream data companies and academic institutions, we have two indigenous launch vehicle manufacturers in Orbex and Skyrora, and both making great strides in the development of environmentally conscious vehicles and the delivery of highly skilled employment across Scotland. Ending Scotland's contribution to climate change remains a key focus for the Scottish Government. We are determined to play a leading role in addressing the climate crisis. With an ambitious target to transition to net zero by 2045. I'm absolutely delighted to see the space sector take a leading role in building this future. We're committed to space, as I said, as a force for good, and we believe environmental considerations are of paramount importance and should be held as a core value throughout the space sector. We've been pleased to see through engagement with the Leadership Council that industry in Scotland share this vision. The sustainable space challenges are a great way for us to further our understanding of how space can play a role in the global fight against climate change. And the Scottish space sector's responsible and ambitious approach to its environmental considerations is what I believe to be the primary differentiator between the sector here in Scotland and those elsewhere. This is our unique selling point, and we must continue to build upon and champion this in all that we do. And this is well reflected through the sector in Scotland, which is environmental considerations as a core thread of all its activities, whether that is manufacturing launch vehicles that can operate with non-recycled plastic waste or monitoring changes in carbon emissions from satellites. While more can always be done, the industry in Scotland has already made great strides in trying to reduce their impact on the environment, and of that I am incredibly proud. Companies like Orbex and Skyrora are making vehicles which are more efficient, more environmentally friendly than most of those currently in use through the use of innovative fuels, smart designs, advanced materials and manufacturing techniques, including 3D printing, for example, for engines. And by doing so, of course, this is a recurring theme in space innovation, by doing so they're developing technologies which may have applications outside the space sector. For example, Skyrora, as part of their commitment to sustainability, have developed their fuel from waste plastics. Not only this, but their space tug will look to remove existing debris within low Earth orbit following launch separation. Our launch sites have completed or are completing extensive environmental impacts assessment as part of their planning stage, and understand that Space Hub Sutherland is committed to being at least carbon neutral. Scotland is leading in small satellite manufacture, as I already indicated, with companies like Alpha Orbito developing solar-powered satellites that can image everywhere on Earth every 15 minutes. And the data and information gathered by satellites is absolutely fundamental in informing the analysis of climate scientists and the decisions made by government. We can see in other areas too how satellite technology can help to transform our society by helping to connect rural and remote areas, by underpinning smart grids to improve energy efficiency, or by enabling the data transfer, which will improve our transport networks. I hope that the outcomes from today's summit can lead to even more opportunities that can be taken forward across the sector and globally, with opportunities such as COP26 and Dubai Expo, which will be the most wonderful platforms to take advantage of, and I urge the space sector to make the most of them. In particular, all eyes will be on Scotland when Glasgow proudly hosts the COP26 Climate Change Summit later this year, which will probably be the most important global gathering of the year. So in closing, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone involved in the organisation and the delivery of this event, in particular our challenge panel and individual leads who have given up so much time voluntarily to support this cause. And I look forward to working with the space sector in Scotland collaboratively to champion our fast-growing space industry and to maximise its potential for sustainable and lasting economic growth. And of course, climate change is a global issue, and Scotland's space sector is very well positioned to be an exemplar sector in terms of sustainability at an international level. So let's grab the opportunities that lie before us with both hands and show the rest of the world what can be achieved through sustainable space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ivan. Very inspiring words. Opportunity, ambition, and responsibility. So thank you very much indeed. We've now got a recorded message from a little bit further afield. The new Director General of the European Space Agency, Joseph Ashbacker, has sent us a message. So let's hear from him.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you at this Sustainable Space Summit conference today, but I would like to convey my best wishes for the panelists and the participants to the Sustainable Space Challenges. Tackling sustainability in space and in the space sector is a very high priority. Indeed, since many years, through its different programs of Earth observation, navigation, or telecommunications, the space sector has fostered sustainable development on Earth. I would say that space plays a crucial role in Europe's drive towards the well-being of its citizens and a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy. The society is facing global challenges, and expectations from the European citizens are growing, and they encourage ESA in formalizing its continuous engagement to address this emergency. In this perspective, we are entering a historical era where ESA and the space sector have the opportunity to reinforce the purpose of technologies to preserve life and resources for the future generations. On ESA's side, I'm thus committed in giving a strong emphasis on sustainability matters in ESA's Agenda 2025 and in the development of a sound ESA Green Agenda to foster its contribution to the sustainability development of society, and in particular to act for reduction of the ESA greenhouse gas emissions of 46.2% by 2030. On the other hand, I'm proud to note that a large number of players in the sector have decided to act together for becoming more sustainable and more responsible. The Charter for a Responsible Space Sector, drawn up collectively by actors from the European space sector, is planned to be signed at COP26 and is a first and significant step for an active sectorial approach towards the sustainable development of society. I'm convinced that the Sustainable Space Summit conference will raise public awareness and provide a stimulus for space agencies and other institutions to scale up their efforts towards sustainability. ESA is more than ready to act. I wish you all an interesting panel and fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Wonderful. We'd now like to introduce the panel of judges. Remember, they went through all the questions that were sent in and selected the 3 questions that were then worked on by our 3 work streams. So we'd like to offer our judges an opportunity to say hello and introduce themselves. And our first judge that we'd like to introduce is Linda Hanna. Linda, over to you.
Thanks very much, Susie. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm the Interim Chief Exec at Scottish Enterprise, and I've been involved in the space sector over the last couple of years in various roles in Scottish Enterprise, I think particularly supporting companies in the work that we've done around investing in early stage companies, in bringing in inward investment to Scotland, and also supporting companies to move into new markets. So that kind of whole kind of company support has been a big thing that I've personally been involved in, and as well as helping some of the capability in Scotland that Minister McKee and others were talking about, particularly around manufacturing and data and technology. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. It's a real pleasure to be part of a conversation about how we collaborate even more about the positive contribution that the space sector can make to those the climate change agenda, but also to bring really high quality jobs in Scotland from our Indigenous company base and the inward investors. And I'd also like to kind of personally acknowledge all the efforts and commitment of everyone involved, including the Scottish Space Leadership Council and others in the past few months to get today's summit off the ground. It's been something I've been particularly looking forward to. Scotland has a brilliant opportunity, I think, to make its mark on the international space market, and we've got a genuine ambition, I think, to be the most sustainable space nation and encourage companies that want to be with us on that journey, I think, to help us to do that. And that's why Scottish Enterprise is absolutely behind this summit and this agenda to do much more of that. Space data, I think, particularly is a huge opportunity, and it's great to see that that's one of the challenges that we're going to be talking about today, and that in selecting the challenges is inspiring that there's been just such a diverse panel involved in looking at these proposals from very different angles. And I think that diversity of view and inclusivity of view, I think, is really quite important in terms of the environmental considerations, as well as the technology, as well as the economic benefits and the business commercial benefits that can come from that. So very keen to kind of hear that. So really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon, looking forward to hearing from the workstream leads. And before I finish, I'd like to just say a big thanks to a number of the colleagues on the call, including Christina and others who've really helped make today happen.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Thank you very much, Linda. Brilliant. Our next judge is going to introduce himself is Richard Dixon. Richard, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much. I've been working for approaching 3 decades for WWF Scotland and Friends of the Earth Scotland, and that's mostly on energy and climate change issues. But before that, I did a degree and a PhD here in Edinburgh in astronomy. So I'm delighted to be trying to help a sector that I'm enthusiastic about address its environmental impact, something that I work on day to day. I'm on the panel later in the afternoon talking about environmental impacts, so I won't bore you with any of the details just now, but I will just touch on one thing, which is there's been already a lot of talk about net zero by 2045, a pretty challenging target, but there's actually a more challenging and more immediate target, which is that we have to halve our climate change emissions but from today's levels by 2030. So that is the immediate challenge that the industry faces. And because it's a growing industry, that's kind of a double challenge. So very happy to be part of this, and I really applaud the leadership that's been shown by particularly Daniel and Christina in bringing this initiative together, and really looking forward to hearing what the workshops have come up with.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. And the next judge that I'd like to introduce is Lucy Rogers. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you. I'd like to ask everyone who is watching, do you remember your first favourite TV programme? Well, for me, it was Play School, and I loved going through the round window to see how things were made, from buttons to biscuits to all sorts of stuff. Well, that manufacturing, that making stuff has stayed with me throughout my whole career. And for the last 20 years, I've been an independent consultant working mainly in the innovation and future fields. I'm also worked on space debris. So in 2011, I was busy arguing with astronauts that space debris actually was a problem when they were telling me, hey, I've done a spacewalk. It's not a problem at all. Space is big. They've changed their minds now. I'm also the author of It's Only Rocket Science, an introduction in plain English, which is being used by many universities around the world as a course text for aeronautical, aerospace stuff. I'm a visiting professor at Brunel University, a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor. I talk about communication and creativity. So all these things have led me to actually having a wide range interest in a lot of the space stuff. But let me take you on another little journey. I went to China to see how robot dinosaurs were being built. These were being built for a theme park, and the theme park was based near the sea. And so it needed to be quite rigorous and tough. So they wanted the skeleton of these robot dinosaurs to be made of stainless steel. And I went there and they looked rusty. I thought, hang on, this isn't right. And it was carbon steel they were using, and it's easier to weld. But they said, oh, don't worry, we'll make it look like stainless at the end. And in the end, they spray painted it silver. Now, this is one of the problems that space industry can have, is we bolt on something at the end where you really need to bake it in at the beginning. And I think we have the chance to put that sustainability, that environmental focus into our space industry now. And I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen and what comes up in the rest of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I loved Play School. I was square window all the way. So that was my favorite.
Super window. Ted for me.
Was it? Okay. And congratulations, you win the prize for best lockdown loungewear with the gold lame jacket. So good effort. Excellent. Okay, our next speaker, Andrea Wiener. Our next judge, I should say. Where's Andrea? There he is.
Yes, here I am. Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from Paris. I'm very honored and pleased to have been participating to this space challenge organized by the Scottish Leadership Council. And I am working for 30 years in the space sector, first in industry and then in the European Space Agency since 20 years, more or less. And in the recent years, I am dealing with corporate social responsibility and sustainable development of space activities in particular. And since few months, I've been appointed Chief Climate and Sustainability Officer of the agency. So I am very pleased to see that the efforts that are done at European level are also done at the local level in Scotland as well as in the UK. And I reassure you that UK is in the foundations of the European Space Agency, as well a member state of the European Space Agency, and moreover, a founder of the European Space Agency. So we have heard from our Director General how important is sustainability and environmental protection in the Agenda 2025, how we have been committing in reducing GHG emissions of the agency by that date. But it is very important also to notice that I, in my position, I'm striving for federating the efforts of all the European space community, industry, operators, space agencies, And therefore, I'm very glad to have participated to the challenges as a judge. And I'm very thankful to Christina and Daniel to having invited me to this event. And I'm looking forward to discuss about the 3 challenges that are very, very important for the future of space and for the future role of Europe in space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's now move on to Philippa Vigano. Philippa.
Hi, thanks, Susie. So thanks very much for inviting me along today and the chance to take part. So I manage the Innovative Technologies Programme at NatureScot, Scotland's nature agency, and we're really interested and excited to learn about how space data can help us work with partners on initiatives to address the climate and biodiversity emergencies. I think when you're in a crisis, you need to think differently and try out new ideas. And it's very much in that spirit that we developed the Innovative Technologies Programme to understand what data and tools we need to respond to these challenges and make a difference. And just to give you a quick example of this approach, NatureScot supports a natural capital approach to land management. And to do this, we needed a complete and repeatable map of habitats and land use. So we had a way of quantifying natural capital, which is all the different bits of the environment that you see around you. And really the only way to do this was to use satellite data. So to meet this need, habitat specialists in NatureScot worked with partners in Space Intelligence, an Edinburgh-based satellite data company, one of those companies we were hearing about at the beginning, to create a high resolution and detailed map of habitats and land cover in Scotland. By using AI Space Intelligence, we're able to scale up the mapping to the whole country and repeat those maps for 2019 and 2020, which we just hadn't been able to do without space data. And all that is available now as open data. And this is really important because if we can repeat the mapping, we can begin to detect and measure change. And really, we've only had those maps since March, but already it feels like they're an indispensable tool in our journey to net zero and a more sustainable approach to land management. And we know that that data needs to be validated and the AI needs good training data. And NatureScot are now looking at how we can collect and manage data to do that. And we think that there's a huge potential to involve citizen scientists as well as our own habitat specialists in validating the map and collecting that training data. And that data needs to be part of an open and accessible digital library that can inform people about land use and habitat. So it's been really interesting to be involved in this conversation. And so a big thanks to Christina and Daniel for asking me to join the panel. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about how the space industry has responded to these challenges. So thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Great pleasure to have you with us. And our final judge is Maura Bajar, coming to us live from Texas, I think.
Yes, good afternoon to all of you. Good morning to myself and other folks here in the US. My name is Maura Bajar. I'm an associate professor of aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics at the University of Texas at Austin, where I lead a transdisciplinary research program in space safety, security, and sustainability. My journey into all this began quite a long time ago as a security guard for nuclear missiles in Montana, where at night I'd see dots of light go across the sky and disappear in the middle of the sky sometimes, and wondering if I was looking at UFOs, and indeed there were UFOs to me, but turned out to be things that humans had put into Earth orbit that I could see with my naked eye. And I think that crystallized my desire to understand that more. By education, I'm an astrodynamicist. Astrodynamics is the science that studies motion and behavior of objects in space. And so my first job out of that gate was working for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, flying stuff to Mars, in my time off. And eventually I left the whole Mars navigation program to work for the US Air Force Research Laboratory on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And that's where I became acquainted with the couple tens of thousands of objects that are currently orbiting the Earth, where 96% of these are rubbish, and only 4% are things that work to give people an actual service or capability. And on Maui, I was able to see the ecological unsustainability, as it were, and that really motivated me to try to find links between environmental sustainability of land, air, and oceans, and you know, could I at that point link it to things in space? And so you know, space is infinite, maybe, but near Earth space is finite, and we have specific orbital lanes and highways that are being used up, and everybody is making decisions in the absence of the decision-making criteria of others, and we face a tragedy of the commons if our behavior does not change. Thank you.
Marvich, thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to have you all as judges, and we're going to hear a lot more from you a little bit later on. But I think now's the time to sort of introduce the actual challenges.
Yes, so these were the 3 challenges that our judges selected from all of the challenges that were submitted. So the first challenge was to understand the nature of space debris, working towards environmental protection of the near-Earth space system.
As Maura has just pointed out. So that's challenge 1. Challenge 2 is looking at the impact of the space sector, direct and indirect, on the environment generally.
And challenge 3, looking at the development of an open and accessible library of space data to empower citizen science. So those are our 3 questions. There were a number of workshops associated with each question, and each question also had a challenge lead. So we're now going to hear from each of the leads for the questions to talk a little bit about what they discussed in their workshops and what solutions and key challenges they were thinking about.
So our first lead is Luke Vanstone and Derek Hams. I think they've got some slides that they're going to present now. So we're going to hand over to you, Luke and Derek, to talk through a little bit about what you found.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you all for hosting it today. It has been an enjoyable journey so far, and delighted to sort of be going first, because I think there's quite a tough act to follow after this in terms of the other speakers. So delighted to be starting. My name's Luke, so I work for the Science and Technology Facilities Council as part of UK Research and Innovation. If you know Edinburgh well, if you know Blackford Hill, that's normally where I'm found, at the Higgs Centre for Innovation. And there's 2 kind of bits that are sort of relevant to the space sector, or 2 functions that we provide. And one of them is supporting space startups with our colleagues at ESA, but also facilities testing of nanosatellites to ensure they survive launch, and indeed the environment that they're going into, using things like vacuum testing and vibration testing. And my personal interest, and the reason kind of why I'm here today, is the sector's growing, and more is being launched, and I think everyone within it should be conscious and aware and thinking about the future, you know, the future challenges, but also opportunities that should come along with it. I've also got Derek here as well. Derek, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you for that, Luke. So my name's Derek Harris, and I work with Skyrora Limited. Skyrora is one of the launch companies that Ivan kindly mentioned earlier, looking to help satisfy the small launch of small micro satellites into orbit from Scotland going forward. The main reason I wanted to be involved was similar to Mariba, is I have an interest in the environment, not only on the ground, but in the skies above, and wanted to make a difference. So back to you, Luke.
Thank you very much, Derek. So, you know, having looked at this kind of challenge, I think our first thought was, it's quite long. There's quite a lot to talk about. If you wouldn't mind moving it on to the next slide. We split it down into 2 workshops. It wasn't something we felt we could adequately cover in one. So we stole around 3 hours of about 30 people's time, and that's not including sort of follow-up meetings and other discussion points. And I'm heavily indebted to all those people who very kindly provided their time. And what was really great to see was a diverse range across industry, academia, and indeed a good flavour from our international colleagues as well, which really helped us in terms of formulating that kind of final outcome and final decision. So greatly appreciated to all those people. The way it was split down was workshop 1, thinking a little bit more about that introduction, what sort of challenges did we think there were, you know, breaking down the question a little bit more. And we'll touch a little bit more on both of these in a bit. Workshop 2 was a little bit more of a deep dive into what we thought the solutions were. And I think that's something that Derek's very kindly going to going to cover. But what was great to see is a general kind of thought that I'm sure Derek would echo was it's clearly something that's encouraged a lot of passion in people and a lot of thought, and indeed you know, that's really exciting moving forward. And I think early stages, that's great to see. If I could move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit around the challenges that were kind of identified in that first workshop, and I'll run through these fairly briefly, but you know, appreciating the fact we're kind of limited on time, it'll only be a sort of top level overview. Firstly, not enough available data, and I think the key word here is available. I think the conclusion that was drawn was in terms of characterization of space debris, which can be particularly challenging for pieces that are 1 to 10 centimeters, that there's not necessarily not enough data currently being collected, but some of it's classified. And indeed, there may be a level of kind of novel data capture in terms of the kind of outcomes that we're talking about. But I think one way to start would be a collection of existing data sets and bringing this together into something you know, more unified. So it's not necessarily a lack of data, but certainly more would be needed to be made available. Secondly, improving space traffic management, both, you know, in terms of a ground segment and that kind of underlying infrastructure to manage all these different pieces up in orbit. But secondly, you know, satellite collision detection and making sure things, you know, try and avoid crashing into each other, amongst other things as well. Number 3, kind of delays to projects and, you know, certainly stuff on the space, you know, the upstream removal side and that taking maybe longer than it does to send stuff up in the first place. Maybe there's more attention on that, which is great because there's lots of great uses of satellites, but maybe more of a balance to both. Some of our more kind of legally and insurance focused minds did mention about regulations, and I think the point of this isn't to enforce regulations retrospectively, but having more in place to avoid collision and enforce responsibility in those early stages would encourage people and organisations to be more sensible when launching in the first place and think a little bit more about that. Number 5 was a level of apathy overall, which is unfortunate, and we can't wait until something bad happens, essentially. I think recently we heard about the debris, sorry, that fell into, fortunately, the ocean. But if that caused more damage, then perhaps it would be more on the agenda. And I think the G7 summit was a start of something, hopefully, to come. Nor deorbiting capabilities. I think it's great to see that the UK Space Agency is putting more money into supporting companies who are tackling these things. I've seen a little bit from other places as well, but I think you know, having had a chance to do this and speak to people, there is clearly a knowledge base within the academic side and indeed in the industrial side as well, and it's encouraging this and bringing this out would be really helpful. And then one more final kind of bit that was touched upon and maybe slightly outside the challenge itself, but still interesting, was repercussions that are unexpected, and I think highlighted was possible damage to the exosphere. So something else just to bear in mind. If I could have the next slide, please, I'll talk a little bit more about one of the solutions before handing over to Derek, who's going to touch on this in a little more detail. There was a sort of particular eagerness or kind of knowledge about perhaps formulating a digital data library. There are some assets out there that collect debris data, but I think that the belief was, in order to take forward future ideas in a controlled and targeted manner, then a better sort of collection of data would be needed. And some of the kind of key features that it should have, such as open access and, you know, a lack of bias, would really help steer and support both academics in terms of thinking further about these challenges, but also help you know, decision makers and industrial companies think more about what they want to do in the future as well. And I think one thing that was seen, you know, during the pandemic, which obviously is a very different challenge, was that idea of building consortium, bringing people together to tackle a shared issue. And I'm thinking particularly about the Protein Folding at Home initiative, which brought together high performance computing facilities across the world, and indeed individuals who could use their laptops to take part in that particular initiative. So something like this might be achievable, and I hope Derek will speak a little bit more on this and other bits we touched on now.
Thank you for that, Luke. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we went through and there was a few suggested follow-ups, a few ideas, but the one that really took traction, as Luke was saying there, was the feasibility for this library. But I don't think things need to end there in that purpose. There is so much further forward that could be pushed, and there was so much passion between all of the experts and volunteers who joined us in the meeting for potential ideas on how this could be done. And so what we wanted to do was not muddy the water by putting lots and lots and lots of various solutions there, but try and tie in with some of the other challenges. I believe challenge 3 is looking at the data library as well, and give support to that and give the thoughts and what people were saying to us in these meetings. So what was key to that is we were aware of the bit requiring to support, foster, and of the international collaborations, not just between companies, but between governments. If we are going to be able to pull this off, we need to make sure that those collaborations are closer than ever before. And we want to continue bringing in people from all sectors. So as I say, during these meetings, we had people from launchers, launch sites, data, Friends of the Earth, and even the investment banks and insurance banks, because we want people from outside to look at us. Sometimes the fresh eyes from someone looking in is going to help us sort of move our way forward. Christina, could you go to the next one, please? So I think the lessons learned from this, as you can see on there, the main big one is really no simple fix. Whether it's the sort of canary in the coal mine example of what are we doing when we go into the upper atmosphere with the fuels and such that are coming from launch vehicles, or whether when we start to deorbit them, there'll be any other aspects from this. They're still very complex. There's a lot smarter people on this meeting and in the room with us today who are looking at studies for these and know these studies have to take and be moved forward for that. And again, I just have to really say collaboration is going to be key for this going forward. And if you can move to the last slide for me, please, Christina. So before I give you my concluding thoughts from this, I would like to thank everyone for being here today, and especially those that turned up to the workshops. There was a lot of passion on display. Thank you to Daniel, Christina, and the rest of the team at SSLC for giving us this chance to lead these workshops, and Alex and my team who helped support us through this to get this over the line. But for my final thoughts, I think we need to look back and start in history a little bit. So Scotland has a long history of innovation, from John Boyd Dunlop creating the first pneumatic tyre to James Naismith and his steam hammers, both of which had long-lasting legacies in industry and life. So the legacy of these inventors and pioneers who laid the path to allow us to be here today, speaking on this very summit, should be the desire to drive us forward, to do more and to want to be held more accountable. So why should the space sector be any different from the other sectors already out there? Scotland has already signed the deal for the data-driven innovation using world-class facilities and the teams at Edinburgh University and Heriot-Watt. So why can't we take that the next step forward, not only gaining that reputation as a data capital of Europe, but also to lead the way in excellence? The space industry is changing and new priorities are emerging, and Scotland sits in the unique position to lead and guide the way forward on these changes. So really, what is our ask? Well, our ask is, this is our time to step up. So from speaking to all these many companies and world-class experts in their area, it's easy to see how our solution could just simply be seen as a document to be completed, but this is not the case. If we really want to make progress with space debris, we need action in the backing of both industry and at all levels of government. The DDI deal was a start to allow collaboration between our world-renowned universities and prominent data businesses, but we can still do more. With SSLC and the workshops have led and brought together some of the best experts and groups around the world, and has allowed the sector to start this evaluation process. And what we now need is for the government to support this movement. This won't be a short-term project completed just by funding a feasibility report to see how we can initiate a data library. This is something that's going to have to be a joined-up effort and required to drive Scotland in the space sector towards being more sustainable in ways to both our environment here on Earth and our fragile planetary environment above. As highlighted at the G7 summit, it should be a concerted effort to not only reach net zero on Earth, but to look towards the equivalent net zero for space use as well. So for challenge one, I would ask that funding is made available for the feasibility study, but more importantly, that the government works with the sector and those external stakeholders to provide and design the roadmap to the digital library and our plans on how we responsibly use space going forward in the future. So thank you again, and Christina, I will pass back to yourselves.
Great, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Luke. Thank you for your hard work and for your thoughts on that. Our second challenge, we're going to hand over to Hina Khan. Hina, who joins us from Glasgow, I think, talking about the sustainability and space challenges. This was challenge number 2. Hi, Hina. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dallas and Susie. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about challenge 2, which was the challenge that I was leading on. You can just move on to the next slide. Just to quickly remind us that we're all here today to talk about the different challenges. So challenge 2 was really about thinking about the space sector specifically and what the impact within the environmental conditions that we have, what the impact of that space sector is, both direct and indirect. So thinking about the emissions and thinking about how we can do what we can do to really contribute to get to the net zero targets. So as Derek and Luke had talked about, we really tried to unpick what the challenge, what the ask was here, what are we looking to do? So it's really thinking about 3 things. Firstly, measuring the impact of the sector. So what is a true impact? And when I say true impact, it needs to really be all encompassing in terms of all of the different aspects that the space sector covers. And then thinking about those which are direct, if you think about launch and site development and infrastructure, and also indirect challenges in terms of thinking about supply chain, thinking about transportation, thinking about, when we look at applications and how those applications are derived. And then finally thinking about, how do we actually reduce emissions and work towards that kind of net zero targeting? So there are a number of key elements that we really needed to think about and really focus in on when we think about, the space sector as a whole and what that approach to understanding and measuring our impact is within our environment. If you move on to the next one. So we had a number of challenge questions which were posed, which as the panelists talked through, they kind of vetted and they identified some issues that we need that were that fitted within this programme. And really they were quite wide ranging actually. I've listed the ones here, I won't go through them in detail, but they covered things like, if you're looking at launch sites and you're looking at capabilities of launch from various different locations across the UK and Scotland specifically, then you have to think around the periphery of that. Things will be redirected and you need to think of the impact of not just what's happening on the spaceport, but actually how that might affect other environments and other industries that are needing to take account of that. So you've got that kind of knock-on effect. We also need to think about, kind of using other aspects of waste and maybe things that are going to landfill, and maybe that we can repurpose some of these ideas or some of these areas into things that we could use within the space environment. Luke and Derek have talked about space debris, and we've got to think about it as a whole system. Yes, there is going to be space debris if you're launching satellites, and there's going to be things which have an issue within the space environment. We also have debris on the ground. So can we try and reduce some of these elements by bringing these things together? One of the key elements here is also thinking about the skills piece within the space industry. It's a known kind of fact that there are kind of challenges around filling the kind of high performance and high spec engineering roles that we need within our sector. But actually, we're not unique in that, and some of these roles and some of these expertise actually lie in other sectors. So we could probably try and draw in some of those areas into what we need and best practices into our space industry, and actually re-leverage some of these opportunities that we have. Two of the overarching questions that came out, and they've both been touched on earlier this afternoon, is thinking about, how do we get to these? How do we meet these two target issues of net zero carbon emissions by 2045, and more specifically by 2030? And what are the key areas that we need to think about, that we need to be looking at very closely with us as a sector to try and address these? If you go on to the next slide. So really, we pulled all these things together, and the questions were posed from across a variety of entities, from governments to environmental groups, to also, organisations such as NATS. And we held a workshop on the 17th of May, really to try and pull together what these questions meant, and really trying to think about how we can look at these things. And it meant that we needed to think about the sector as a whole, and how the sector is looking at addressing sustainability issues. And what we found was actually we drew in both entities that were working quite heavily and focused within this area, but actually bringing in those people in adjoining industries. The work that is being done by ESA, who we'll hear about from later on, and also from the food and drink sector, who also you'll hear. And it's fantastic that we've got these speakers in to kind of promote some of the work that they've been doing, and how we can really adapt to looking at the sustainability within our own sector. But also, it's not just about industry and public sector. There's a lot of work being done within academic environments on looking at the research piece that's required to understand what the impact is, and how sustainability can be tackled within the sector to make lasting changes. So really, it was about bringing all these things together, and all these organisations and entities to really have that discussion, and that's really what the workshop was all about. So a kind of summary of the discussion was really highlighted within these kind of points here. What we found actually was that there is quite a significant piece of work being done, and good practices and positive action being taken from across the sector, but quite focused actually within the spaceport environment. I suppose it doesn't come as any surprise that as a necessity for spaceports to develop their business case, but also the collaborative environment that they need to work with communities. They really need to think about the impact that they're having, both on the land, but also the ecosystem that they're working in. And there has been a lot of work that's been done already to illustrate and to piece together that impact, and what the positive aspects as well as the mitigating factors that need to be thought about. We've also talked about the kind of looking at the entire life cycle of the space system, looking at the rockets, the fuels, the emissions, and how that's impacting our natural environment. Nature-based solutions that Philip has talked about. So really thinking about those whole system approaches of the entire life cycle. There's some really innovative work being done on the fuel side that Skyrora and Orbex were able to highlight and really talk quite detailed about, and that's really important to get that information out there. We also talked about, a lot of companies are in a position where even understanding the baseline is a really step forward. You have to understand where you're starting from before you can start to think about areas of reduction or offsetting, and how you might monitor the impact that you're having. So really, that was a really important part of the discussion, that organisations and entities need support to be able to make these changes, but they need to understand where they're coming from. And then taking that and then looking at what's happening across Europe with the ESA Charter. Like I say, we'll hear a little bit about that in a few minutes time. So the outcomes that we got from this discussion was really focused in on about these things. Having this baseline is fundamentally important. You need to know where you are as a sector before you can really start to answer the questions on where the challenges and mitigation strategies can come into place. And really, there needs to be a support from external organisations, of which there are many within Scotland. Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Government, also Scottish Engineering, who have a roadmap roadmap on supporting industry within the engineering facet as principally to really support them in understanding where sustainable issues and challenges can be met through that. Also working with organisations within our own community who are looking at this reporting piece and helping understand where we're starting from. There was clearly good stories that were coming out and good understanding of nature-based solutions and how industry is implementing some of these net zero processes through the spaceports and rocket fuel developments. These are really good things that need to be promoted and really made available to the general public so that they can understand that actually what's happening within the space sector is important, and we are thinking about how sustainable how the sustainable environment can be considered in a form which is positive. A number of other aspects that I've touched on, you know, looking at emissions, looking at the planning of subsidiary and complementary areas is also important. So if you move on to the next slide, what we came on to was actually the outcome of our discussions led to kind of 3 focus workshops, which we hope to hold over the coming weeks. And we focus in on these 3 aspects. So thinking about how we can leverage skills and expertise from other environments, other sectors, to really use that in a way which is both waste management control, but also on that skills piece where those expertise are not lost. Looking at the impact of emissions and how companies can understand where the emission impacts are and where the emission strategies need to be considered a little bit more in a little bit more focused manner to be able to allow strategies to be put into place. And then finally, though not insignificantly, actually coming to an understanding of where that baseline is, and then working to support organisations to be able to help them understand this is where we're starting from, and also thinking about these are the things that we can impact ourselves, and we also have this information to hand that we can start to make these changes. Now, there are organisations, as I've listed here, across the community, both in and outside of the space sector, who can help put these things in place. And I think that's really the focus that came out of this discussion, was we really need to start building on our own understanding, but also using what is around us from other organisations, other entities who have been through this challenge, and started to put these policies in place. So I think with that, it was a really useful conversation, and I thank everybody who attended our workshop. Like as everybody has said, this is only the start of a conversation, and definitely something that we want to follow up on in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hina, and thank you for all of your work leading this work stream. I'd like to encourage everyone watching, if you have a question, to pop it in the Q&A. We're going to be opening the floor for questions, both with our work stream leads and with our panel of industry experts who introduced themselves earlier. So please do pop questions in the Q&A. I'd like now to introduce Sue Key, who's going to present the discussion on Sustainable Space Challenge number 3. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Susie. So last but hopefully not least, my name's Sue Key. I am the Head of Business Development at AAC Clyde Space for Missions and Services. I'm not going to burn my whole 10 minutes by reading the title of this challenge, because I think that would take quite a long time. But suffice to say, Challenge 3 is around the development of an open and accessible digital library of space data. And that's particularly of interest to me because my bit of the business at AAC Clyde Space is around missions and services and delivering space data as a service. So why is this challenge important? Well, as already touched on by both the First Minister and Minister Ivan McKee, we do have a legal and moral obligation around the reducing and limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius through the Paris Agreement, and we're aiming to achieve a climate neutral world. Space data, particularly from Earth observation satellites, can really help us to interpret and track change on our planet. We can look at large areas of the globe with regular revisit time. We can use the full electromagnetic spectrum from infrared through visible light to microwave to look at different things such as vegetation, soil moisture, flooding, wildfires. We can look at food security. There's lots of things that we can assess and understand from space. We can also use radar active imagery, including synthetic aperture radar and LiDAR. We can monitor glaciers and atmospheric components with these types of payloads. So it's all very useful data, but it is also not the full solution. We need the ground truth as well. And often data from space, although there is a lot of free data available through the likes of the Sentinel satellites, it can be quite expensive to procure or difficult to find, and often it requires specialised skills to process and compute to get the meaningful insights that we need out of them. So that's why it's important for this challenge to be addressed. So for the challenge, we kicked off with a workshop last month, and we had a nice diverse range of attendees from industry, academia and public sector. And I guess that the summary of the conversation that we had over 2 hours was that we identified there is a global opportunity for Scotland to lead the way towards net zero. And perhaps we can work with partner nations too to get broader access to environmental data. And I think one of the key messages that we identified was that this isn't just about doing good, there's actually commercial opportunity here too. If we can develop something that is useful and meaningful in addressing environmental issues, it can be commercialised and sold globally as well. So there were 4 specific challenges which all fed into this idea of a digital library of data, space data. So NMIST asked the question, can companies evaluate their supply chain's impact on the environment with Earth observation data? Nature Scott wants to know if we can improve on current tracking of natural capital and the monitoring of land cover change. Scottish Enterprise asked if we can collaborate better to share data and create an interoperable data platform to aid proactive decision making. And think tank Maths, we're looking at how do we measure and understand the impact of debris in lower Earth orbit. So a really diverse set of questions, but all very data centric. So on to the next slide. Some of the lessons that we learned. The first, which I'm echoing Luke and Derek when they said, there is no simple answer. I think if it was easy, we would have answered it already. But what I think we agreed was that we wanted to start small and build out, and what better place to start than in Scotland. So we're a small country, but we have got the same challenges that every other country has, and we have a great capability to get started looking at our own country. We also identified there are multiple countries that we could learn from or collaborate with. We've got obviously lots of Five Eyes and Commonwealth partners. We talked specifically, for example, about Norway, who are investing a lot in their net zero campaign, and they have released open data for monitoring deforestation and oil fields, for example. And we also already identified that there are huge volumes of data already out there, but they are in a variety of formats and locations, and sometimes it's quite tricky to find them, and so that's something that needs to be considered. So our actions from that initial workshop were, first of all, to develop, in conjunction with the Scottish Space Leadership Council, a forum for Scottish organisations to align our priorities and our opportunities around space-derived data for environmental applications. So that will be ongoing. As is action number 2 around seeking support from the Scottish Government, particularly around reaching out to our colleague nations to collaborate. So I think that will be a longer term action once we identify exactly what we want to work with them on. And then the third action I'm going to talk a little bit more about around this concept of a catalogue of coordinated Scottish environmental datasets. So we followed up on that specific action with another workshop, and I'm delighted that I was joined by a very talented and knowledgeable group of people across industry and academia to help flesh out this project, which we think the aim is to improve the accessibility and usability of remote sensing data for Scotland to solve environmental challenges. So, and first of all, thank you to those individuals who've taken part and who are continuing to volunteer their time and their expertise. So our mantra for taking this forward is to be focused on users and don't reinvent the wheel, because this is something that is going to be, it has been talked about for years and will continue to be talked about for years. So we don't want to just bang our heads against a wall and not actually fix anything. But so we've identified 4 distinct user groups, all the way from the very technical kind of data scientist group of people who understand that Python is not just a snake, all the way to non-coding business users who really just want an API to plug into their application to get insights. And our vision for that is really a kind of catalogue of catalogues. So we're not recreating existing data sets, we're just going to be able to sort them and point people to them and make them searchable, perhaps the ability to add more data sets in a consistent format. So we're using technical stuff that's probably out with my understanding, but markup languages and human readable markup languages in order to create this kind of consistent format. So what, I hear you say, this is all very aspirational, idealistic chat. So what you're going to do about it. So we've got 2 distinct actions that I think we can achieve by the end of this year to actually start moving on some of this and to take real action. The first is to engage in the NASA Space Apps Challenge in October this year. So this is an annual event. It takes place anyway. Normally it's hosted at various locations across the globe. But obviously, much like everything else this year, it will be virtual, but it will take place in October and the challenges will be announced in August. But we're actually hoping that we will be able to influence the challenge. We're waiting for dates to discuss with NASA, the team on the Space App Challenge, around how we could perhaps influence a challenge such that it addresses one of the topics that we've already discussed. So for example, the NMIS challenge about can companies in manufacturing try and measure and understand the impact that their supply chain is having on the environment? Or perhaps the Nature Scot challenge around land cover and natural capital. So if we can sort of almost try that out in a small way to get an initial data set, there's already going to be data out there we can use, but to beef it up with some other perhaps ground truth, some additional data sets that we have in Scotland, and also to generate a lot of interest in Scotland for addressing these types of issues. And then we believe that we can galvanise Scotland and Scottish universities around contributing to that hackathon. And then perhaps the follow-on from that will be to create a sandpit for development of applications, and we're hoping that we can get some funding for that. And that again is working towards this catalogue of catalogues that I talked about. So just understanding where are all the different data sets and what do they look like, what do they do, what are we looking at here? Is it, is it fields, is it oceans, is it rivers, is it bogs, is it what are we looking at, and what information can we glean from that? We'd like to develop a web front end so that people can search for data sets and also add their own in this consistent format, and perhaps also have some supporting like Jupyter notebooks, so coding guidance and structure so that then people can take that data and move it on to their own application. So that's where we're at. There's been lots of interesting activity. The journey has just begun, and I look forward to carrying on with it in the future. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Sue. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all of our workstream leads for all your thoughts and comments. Hey, look, we've only got 3 questions in the Q&A, so we need some more questions. So if you're logged on and you've been listening in, give us your questions and our judges will be able to discuss those as well. We're really, really keen on hearing from you out there. But I think it's time to bring our judges back.
Yes, we're going to ask each of our judges in turn to give their thoughts on the presentations that we just heard. And the first person we'd like to hear from is Linda. So Linda, do you have any thoughts?
Thanks very much, Susie. So think it was just great. I think it's great to see the practical dimension to this. So, and not just in terms of the depth of the conversations and the academic. Great to see some of the themes coming through there. I think particularly collaboration. You know, that's certainly something very close to our heart in Scottish Enterprise, and something I'd be quite keen to explore a little bit further with some of the work streams and the challenges just around some of the practical steps around that. And also, I think great to hear the point about this is based on users. So it's not just about, you know, theory. It's about how is this going to be used and how that's going to benefit what happens on the ground. And I'm keen to, I think, just unpack a little bit more around the kind of readiness, you know, to use the data and what else we need to be doing just to make sure that we're ready to kind of pick that up. So great to see the progress that's been made. And as I say, great to see that it's now going to be, you know, very much a path to move this forward into taking some practical steps.
Great, thanks, Linda. Do feel free to disagree as well with anything you've heard. If you're outraged by anything that's been said, do feel free to be outraged, disagree vehemently, etc. Richard, your thoughts, please.
Thanks very much. I'm going to start with the second challenge because I was in the workshop led by Hina. And one of the things that became pretty obvious straight away is that space people are not stupid. And you've already thought about lots of interesting things.
You heard it here first. Space people not stupid. I'm going to make a note of that.
So, but I think the challenge is to bring together that thinking, to identify the gaps and fill those in, and then to mainstream those good bits of thinking that have been done about rocket fuels, impacts on the environment, materials, etc. But I think also one of the things that I raised, and I think we need to be very careful of, is which potential solutions we're backing. So, and the one example I'll give you is that at the moment there's a lot of hype about hydrogen, and we need to be very careful about how much hydrogen there really will be available, how much it will cost, where it will be. So let's not back hydrogen as a big solution. Let's keep a careful eye on it in case it is an important part of the solution. And another thing that came out of that workshop was just another agenda that we should be fitting in with is the one about oil and gas skills, and can we transfer people across from an industry which is going to be in decline to an industry which is growing. And in Scotland, we have a Minister for Just Transition. So this is a really serious agenda now, and there's a big opportunity. One of the figures quoted was 20,000 jobs. Ivan McKee said that's the ambition. And so let's make sure some of those people are people who are losing their jobs in oil and gas that have skills that could transfer over. On challenge number 1, space debris, we've made a pretty thorough mess of planet Earth, and we're doing the same to the orbital environment. So Luke was a bit more optimistic than me, but I think the key phrase he put up was that we can't have apathy until a catastrophic event happens. But sadly, that's kind of the way international and governance often works. That and if you think on the local level, even here, road safety improvements only happen when someone dies on a local road. But I thought the multinational aspect obviously is really important in that one, because we can make a big effort to clean up our space data, space debris, and to track it. But if someone else is freely leaving stuff all over the place, then we're all in trouble. So the multinational aspect really important. And then finally on space data, as Sue said, there's loads of important environmental data coming in, tracking rainforest loss, looking at where the trawlers are they after unsustainable pools of fish, all of those things, really, really important environmental management that's been going on for decades with data that's come from space. And I was really heartened by the idea that there's a huge volume of data out there, but it's not yet drawn together. So really exciting to hear about the idea of a new data set development project in Scotland, but let's try and make that bigger than Scotland when we've cracked it here as well. So lots of great ideas, and I really encourage everybody to keep engaged and turn them into reality, as Linda suggests.
Great, thank you so much for your thoughts, Richard. We're going to hand now over to Lucy Rogers.
Thanks. It's been so good, and I feel so good that so many people are actually looking at these problems. I've got a question actually for all of the groups, is have you looked at the blockers? Why haven't these things progressed? Who is going to stop you doing it? So I'm thinking maybe space debris. I think it was already mentioned that the military may have words about not putting all the data up there. And as Richard said, what if other countries are just polluting? We have regulations, but as has been mentioned, they're not enforceable. So what can we do? Are they worth it? Do we need tighter ones? How do we police it? So I'm wondering if these thoughts have been incorporated into the whole idea. And also, who's going to pay? How are we going to get these ideas, these things to pay for themselves all the way through? Yeah, it does seem ridiculous that if we do have a Kessler effect, if there's so much space debris that it knocks out our access to space and all our satellites, then that will be a huge cost. But putting money in before that happens, I think, as we've proved for the pandemic, doesn't always happen. So how are we going to actually get this money and get people on board and all trying to do this thing? I did like the thought of the knock-on effect of putting space rockets up from Scotland and how it affects the aeroplanes, how it affects the fishing fleets, how it affects everybody else. So I'm really pleased that was incorporated. And I liked the idea of piggybacking off some things that NASA are doing. So the app competition that NASA are doing, and just actually using the stuff that's out there. There's an awful lot of stuff out there, you're quite right. And actually having this usable, searchable database would be absolutely wonderful of where is this stuff? What can we do? How can we get access to it? So I'm very encouraged by the whole thing, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you, Lucy. Very eloquent. Thank you very much indeed. Andrea, next.
Thank you. I can only echo my colleagues in thanking the facilitators, leaders, and contributors to those challenges. A lot of things have been already said. I would like just to pick up a few points on the three challenges. The first one is that international cooperation and regulations is very important for space debris and near objects identification. And this is a key point for going on. As Lucy was reminding, the challenges at stakes are very much on the defense and military side. On challenge number two, I think that the ESA Charter, which is actually an ESA Charter, is a charter of all the stakeholders involved in the space sector, has been recalled. This is a solution to go all together towards the same direction. It is very important also to underline that space activities have a long cycle of research and development and a very small production. That launches, although are, let's say, very visible in terms of pollution.
Andrea, I'm going to just interrupt you, Andrea. We're struggling to hear you. Just very echoey, and I'm wondering if it's your AirPods. If you could, if you take those out and use your microphone, it might be a wee bit better.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, better. Yes, thank you.
Sorry for that. So I wanted just to pick up a few points of the three challenges. I try to run on them. So the first one about space debris, as was recalled, of course, international cooperation and exchange of data and creation of an international database is fundamental, but the blocking points has been recalled by Lucy, and for sure this is an important one. On challenge number two, we keep calling ESA Charter, but this is a charter of the entire space sector. So at this moment at European level, but we are working with all the stakeholders. We are promoting it, but there are also other promoters. And this is also something that is going to contribute, because the assessment of what is the real emission of the space sector is fundamental to understand where we have to put our efforts in the future. So there is already a lot of work in research and development for having a green propellant. It has been recalled hydrogen coming from biomass for launchers. I would say that the life cycle assessment is already applied to many of ESA projects for the systems, for the products, for the components, and we have an handbook, a guideline, a set of guidelines to guide our industry in perform life cycle assessment. And life cycle assessment is fundamental to improve the performance of the different components. On the challenge number three, about the Open Digital Library, I think that this is extremely important. you may know that there are a number of essential climate variables which have been identified by the United Nations. And since 2018, there is a climate change initiative in ESA, and there is a climate office in the ESA premises in UK, which are in the Harwell campus in the Oxfordshire, who is delivering information and is delivering those 54 essential climate variables, and it is keeping them up to date. Climate variables are very important to understand how our atmosphere is, how the surface of the Earth is, and those are derived from the space-based data which are coming from Earth observation satellites, Copernicus, but also other ones. So this is a reality. Those data, those variables are available for decision makers, are available for government, are available for local authorities, and of course for developers, for those who want to develop services and application on them. So these were the points that I wanted to pick up. Great job.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Let's move on now to Philippa.
Thank you. I really enjoyed listening to the feedback from the workshops, and there's been a lot of work done. I thought it was really interesting to note that two of the challenges mentioned the importance of data and libraries to manage and access that data, and I think that's going to become increasingly important because the quantity of data that we're getting from satellites is already huge, and it's only going to increase. And at the same time, we've got lots of demands for new data and new types of data to help us monitor and manage the environment. So I think as well as drawing the data together, there's a challenge here to make sure that we have the data that we need to help us with these problems. And I guess this really echoes the point Linda made about understanding that user need. So I think it means that policymakers and decision makers need to understand what's possible, what data is available, and talk to the Earth observation and satellite data specialists so that we can identify the right metrics in the data, so that we can begin to measure and monitor the right parts of the environment. And I guess we're in a really good place to do this in Scotland because we're developing all stages of the space industry, from building and launching satellites to developing sensors and data analysis. So, it's just making sure that conversation happens, I guess. And we also need to make sure that data is accessible and open so people can use it to understand the environment around them and how it's being used to support decision making. So I think that will be really interesting conversation to have. And I was also interested to hear Hina mention in Challenge 2 nature-based solutions as a tool that might be being used by the space industry to reduce or offset emissions. And I guess, as well, it would be really interesting, Hina, to have a conversation about what data you might need to understand those nature-based solutions. You mentioned about promoting good news stories about nature-based solutions, and I think that's really important. So yeah, like lots of people have said, it's the beginning of a really interesting conversation, I think. So thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. And finally, Moriba, your thoughts. And I know you're going to have lots of thoughts. This is so your area.
Look, I'm actually very happy and encouraged to see all the activity that's happened in the workshops. And I feel that a lot of gold nuggets have been uncovered in terms of what needs to happen moving forward to make, to be biased towards a positive impact and difference. I too am wondering about, the funding and resources to be brought to bear to this, but I certainly think that the creation and development of this digital commons that can not only house multi-source heterogeneous data sets, but also models of the physics of the environment and of the objects in the environment and these sorts of things, that's critical. That has to happen sooner rather than later. It's a non-trivial thing. I kind of know because I've been doing it for a bit. And so I would like to see, in no uncertain terms, an extreme sense of urgency from Scotland in just making this happen. Don't think about it too much. You know, perfect is the enemy of good enough. Establish this immediately and just know that it's a work in progress, but just do it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Maura. We're gonna do a little Slido vote for anyone who wants to, just to see what you think is the kind of perhaps the most important of our three challenges, or the closest to a solution perhaps. So if you put your cameras up to the QR code, and then you can have a little vote and see where your priorities are.
Yep, so we encourage everyone to do that. In the meantime, we're going to have a Q&A with the challenge leads and also all of our industry experts that we just heard from. So we've been asking for questions. We actually have quite a few questions that have come in. I'm going to ask the first question, and I'd like anybody who would like to jump in on this to unmute yourself and leap in. The first question is, how big an impact in carbon emission savings are possible by not having to transport UK-built payloads overseas for launch? So thinking about reduction in carbon emissions just through having our own launch facilities here in the UK. Does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share on that question?
So actually, this was something. This is Hina from Spire Global. We were talking about Challenge 2. This is actually something that we talked about a little bit when we were looking at the life cycle of the space system. You know, and where the significant contributing factors were when we think about emissions and carbon. And most people think, oh, it's because you've got a big rocket and you're launching these things into space, and that's where the significant contributor must come from in terms of emissions. But actually, it's more significant on that transportation and on the manufacturing supply chain side of things. So yeah, I think there's definitely a piece of work that we need to do to think about being a little bit more local in how we source equipment and how we source manufacturing needs. But also, if we're looking at spaceports which are more locally based and that transportation piece can be reduced, then I think that does significantly reduce our impact as a sector as well. So it's definitely something that should be positively considered, but I think it needs to be weighed up against, you know, where are we getting all those components to build our satellites, payloads, or whatever it is, and then where do we need to take them to in order to be able to launch from whatever site we're looking at.
Thank you, Richard. I think did you put your hand up?
Yes, I was going to say the same kind of thing, but I'll give you an example from another sector. We're having a boom in offshore wind at the moment, but most of the gearboxes, the turbine blades, the steelwork that makes the towers that they sit on, most of that's coming from somewhere else. And indeed, some of it's coming from the other side of the world, which is crazy because, as Hina says, a big part of the impact is the energy and the CO2 consequences of transporting things around the world. So this is a really big challenge and one we need to get right. And again, coming back to the just transition and the 20,000 jobs that Ivan McKee wants to be in this sector, we need to make sure we do as much of it as possible in Scotland so that it's created here, used here, and disposed of here, recycled here, so that we can get all of the benefits.
Thank you, Richard. Now, we can't see all of our judges on screen, so if you do want to just jump in, just unmute yourselves, judges and work stream leads, just do that. Thank you very much.
Wait, was someone jumping in?
Sorry, Dallas, just to jump in there myself.
Yes, good, thank you.
Philip from Skyrora. So that's exactly what from what the team were saying there, we have been doing since building Skyrora and starting from 4 years ago, is examining the supply chain across Scotland and the UK and seeing how we can get these parts closer. Do we really need to be reaching out to get 3D printed parts from Italy, things like this, and trying to take that carbon footprint from the transfers of the items and the products and everything else that we need to launch into account. But someone else made a very, very good statement earlier about retraining some of the oil and gas workers as well. This is a big, big thing because at the moment, that will have a carbon footprint as well from them, from the staffing point of view. If we can get these staff that are already here on these shores trained and just with a smaller training aspect rather than having to send someone away back to NASA or ESA, you're going to get the knock-on effect from that as well. It may only be slight in the grand scheme of things, but I think every little thing that we can do in this industry is going to be a big, big change for us. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, here's another question that's just come in. For those of us that missed the challenge workshops, how can we engage further? Our cluster shares info and knowledge. How can we share further our cluster shares info and knowledge? So happy to share development surveys, etc. Would this be welcome or possible?
Yeah,
So basically, how do people get involved?
Yeah, if you didn't get involved the first time around,
Yes.
have you missed your opportunity?
Yes. Presumably the answer is no. You haven't missed your opportunity and people can get involved. I'm not quite sure who's best placed to answer that. No one.
Probably one thing that you could do is get in touch with the leads for the streams if you would like to be involved further.
Exactly.
They'll be leading the conversation.
And also,
forwards.
yeah, and have a look at the Scottish Space Leadership Council as well. Have a look at their website. There's loads and loads of information on there. And I think probably in the chat box as well, we're going to be putting up, or the SSLC will be putting up lots of different information about things that we've talked about. So have a little look at the chat box and hoover up all those links to important things. Yep.
Okay, next question. So this question says, how do we find the right balance between an obvious focus on innovation and new product development and building in consideration of sustainability challenges to make sure that we don't have to retrofit suboptimal solutions for sustainability afterwards? So basically, how do we embed sustainability in our innovation programs? Anyone like to dive in on that one?
Yeah, Derek from Skyrora again. I think the best way to say is focusing on, I think it was Professor earlier who was saying about tacking things on at the end of a project. It really needs to be inbuilt from day one. It needs to, so from environmental purposes, needs to be from the design stage of any engineering project going forward. So any implementation, if it's a startup company, if it's a well-established company, if it's two different routes. From the startup, try and implement it straight from the beginning. You might think it's a bit of a pain, but it's a lot less painful and a lot less expensive for a company to start at the beginning with this. Whereas if a company's having to adopt this later, I know you've got the whiskey and drinks sector coming on a bit later. They will explain, I'm sure, the cost of trying to change things after things have been built. So your best way is to be able to do it right at the beginning. Other than that, it's now review it, get it done, and unfortunately it'll just be a little bit more expensive than it would have been maybe 6 months ago or a year.
That's a really, really good point, Eric. Thank you so much for that. Get it right first time is the sensible answer. Anybody else? Did anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Hi, Lucy Rogers here. I'd like to add to what Derek was saying there about how just because it's sustainable or recyclable doesn't actually have to mean it's worse or more expensive. There are options now that are cutting edge that do all meet these requirements in many of the things. So actually using them may be financially a good idea as well as an environmentally good idea. So there are those things that we can embed now. We just have to look for them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lucy. Next question. And this is something we've sort of talked about already, but maybe we can sort of elucidate further. There's been mention about sustainable fuels for satellites and launchers. What are we expecting to see there? Alternative fuels versus more sustainable manufacturing? Question mark. And what breakthroughs have been made in recent years?
So I'll start off, and I'm sure Derek will probably come in to give his piece on it. So this was something we talked quite heavily on in terms of, what is being done within the sector to look at these issues, because, obviously rocket fuels are an important aspect that need to be considered. And there is work, and I'll see Derek will come in a second to talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. But really it's thinking about, thinking about the overall picture of what is that impact, and we can't just thinking what Richard said earlier as well. There are alternative fuels out there, but we need to be sure that alternative fuel it doesn't have a negative impact on what we're trying to achieve here. So we need to also be careful that this scenario that we're trying to achieve doesn't inadvertently cause a bigger problem because of the mechanisms within which we need to implement it, but also in how we are going to drive these things forward. So I think there is a lot of good work going on in terms of alternative fuels, but we need to be careful that that program actually is makes a positive impact in the challenge that we're trying to address here.
Andrea, if I may say something in addition, I think that we should not underestimate the synergies between the aeronautics and space in this very case. I think that in the aviation sector and in the aeronautic industry, there is very much at stake, and the space can take a lot of benefit from synergies in this area. And the green propellant is for sure one of the most promising areas for improvement and for exploiting synergies between aeronautics and space.
Well, as Hina said, I will jump in again. Derek from Skyrora. We have EcoScene, which was mentioned a few times, which is the previously plastics that went straight to landfill that are now can be recycled through the three-stage process to give us the fuel that we use. This is great news for me, but I think, as Hina says, you have to have the larger view of this. We've looked at our fuel and we've looked at our oxidizer to try and find one that has a better measure on it. And what I mean by that, so for every 1 part of fuel that we need to use, we use 6 parts oxidizer. The oxidizers, there's various different ones you can use that come out with different sort of nasties, if you want to call it chemical-wise. But the one we've chosen breaks down to oxygen and H2O or steam, basically. This is just a small step. I would love to say this is the end to the main problem, but it's not. It's a first step. There's going to be much more innovations with that. People have mentioned hydrogen, the cycle, but until we start looking at fuel forms of our sustainable power, it is only going to be these small steps. So if we're willing to look at sustainable power and sustainable fuels, and more money is poured into the sector, I think you'll see a big change, not only in the way that rockets are launched, but in all the sectors around it as well.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we have one asking, as well as self-driven sustainable decisions, what level of laws or regulations are there currently for reducing space debris? Would anyone like to talk a bit about the laws and regulations around space debris? Moriba.
Yeah, sure. Look, one of the things that people kind of raise eyebrows on is they think that there are no space laws. Actually, we have quite a few of them. A lot of these are encapsulated in various treaties and conventions and these sorts of things. There is the language used are things like, states should not be engaged in harmful interference and this, that, or the other. And so these are very loosely interpreted. So I think that's part of the problem. And, very recently at the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space, there was 21 guidelines for long-term sustainability of space activities that came out of that. And now it's really up to all the people that signed these recommendations and guidelines to actually implement these as space law in their own countries. And so that could be a thing that could happen. At the end of the day, liability for any damage or harmful interference in space is not borne by non-government actors. It all falls on the shoulders of launching states, which are governments. So governments have the ultimate responsibility. It's in their hands really how they devise and come up and implement and even enforce their own space laws in their own countries. And I think governments need to just come together and say, look, we all need to do this because it's in the best interest of the environment.
Oh, we can't hear you, Dallas and Susie.
I'm sorry. I've got a little button on my microphone. I keep forgetting to press it. Thank you very much to everyone who submitted questions. We're sort of slightly running out of time as ever, but we'll try and answer your questions, or somebody will try and answer your questions in the actual Q&A box. Quick look at Slido reveals challenge 2. You're kind of the winner. I mean, all 3 challenges have got good amounts of votes. Challenge 2, the environmental impact, wins something. I don't know, maybe a bottle of champagne or something. Anyway, thank you very much for your input there. We're going to hand over now to Andrea, who's going to be talking the Sustainability Charter keynote from ESA. So Andrea, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. I will drive you towards this exercise or initiative of developing a charter for a responsible space sector. As I said before, it's not an ESA charter, it's a charter for which ESA has taken the initiative, but we are really supported by many, many other players about that. First of all, next please, a few words about the European Space Agency, for those who are not so familiar. So the European Space Agency is an intergovernmental organization counting 22 member states, among which, as I said before, the United Kingdom are founding members since 1975, and we have all other member states across Europe. The agency is established in 1975 for peaceful purposes. We have developed since then more than 80 satellites tested and operated. We have a budget currently of the order of 6.5 billion euros, about which we have 80% of industrial contracts, meaning that we have the largest part of our budget, which is transferred to industry all over Europe. And this is meaning 12 euros per year per European citizen. And then in 2020, we have performed 8 launches, meaning that it's a relatively small number of launches compared to the entire park of launches in the world. Next, please. Which are the activities of ESA? ESA is one of the few space agencies that is covering all the spectrum of space-related activities. We are covering science and exploration, with the exploration of the solar system, with the international European participation to the International Space Station, and other LEO, Low Earth orbiting initiatives, and to the exploration programs towards the Moon and Mars. Then we are dealing with space application in the fields of telecommunication, navigation, and Earth observation. Then we have a pillar about safety and security, space safety and space security. And finally, we have a set of important enabling and support activity. First of all is the development of a space transportation system, a launch system. Then the technology development for all the activities of the agency, and space operations. Next, please. Let's have a look at what is the possible evolution of the global space market. In terms of revenues, you have a picture on the left side of the view graph, which in 2020 is estimated about 350 billion of US dollars. And it is estimated in 20 years from now to reach 1 trillion US dollars. And the launch activities is simply going over for an order of magnitude in the next 20 years. So there is an expansion of space activities, and we have to take care of how space activities are impacting on the environment. Space is an R&D intense sector. As you can see on the right part of the view graph, you can have in the mass market product about 8,000 tons of products produced with only a couple of years of research and development activities, which means 0.09 days of R&D per ton produced. A space mission, on the contrary, has more than 10 years of development, and we can say that the amount of R&D is spread over those 10 years, and the product is only 3 tons, which means that we have 1,200 days of R&D per ton, which changed a lot the perspective. of space with respect to mass product, even though the market is expected to expand. So the very important thing to know is that there is a lot of R&D in space with respect to the production. Next, please. What is the recipe now for having sustainable space or space for sustainability? There are two enabling factors. There is the need to increase the contribution of space to space projects and missions to the sustainable development of a society. This is already the case. I mean, we have Earth observation satellites which are producing essential climate variables. We have navigation systems that are improving the traffic around Europe and in the world. We have to increase this contribution, extending sustainability criteria to all space missions and products. On the other side, we have to try to reduce the impact of space activities on the environment and reducing the emissions. So this is meaning promoting the sustainability of space activities all in all. And this is the paradigm that the European Space Agency is pushing forward. How? Next, please. Through the development of an ESA Green Agenda, which is based on 5 key pillars. Reinforcing the sustainability of ESA projects through the selection, together with our member states, of projects which are contributing to the ecological transition and to the carbon neutrality. The second one is developing and implementing life cycle assessment, eco-design, and R&D activities at the basis of all the space activities promoted by ESA. And this is something that has been recalled a few minutes ago. It's very important that all those activities are performed upfront. And then the satellites, the products, the system, and the subsystems are designed according to eco-design and according to a proper assessment of their life cycle. The third pillar is about procurement supply chain. It is not enough to do in the European Space Agency. We have 80% of our budget which is spent elsewhere. So it is very important that the procurement and supply chain has a responsible and sustainable attitude. Of course, we have to look also at our activities inside. So facility and asset management. We have to be green on the management of our sites, infrastructures, laboratories, tests, ground stations, as well as IT infrastructure. And finally, last but not least, culture and ways of working. We need to adapt the way of working of the agency, as many other actors nowadays in the space sector, to a new culture and a new environmental friendly culture. Next, please. So the objective is to reduce ESA greenhouse emission by 2030, in line with the target set by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, of 46.2% with respect to the baseline, which is set in 2019. And we are going to operate on the ESA core business, as well as sites and corporate ICT, as I was saying before. And there will be possibly a small amount of compensation to be taken into account to reach the target of 46.2 by 2030. Next, please. ESA has 3 main branches of activities to go beyond its fences. Let's have a look at the upstream activities. So extraction of material, R&D and manufacturing are very well within the ESA fences. So we can do very much there, developing, again, eco-design, implementing systematically life cycle assessment, and manufacturing all the products that are paid with the taxpayer money in an eco-responsible way. Then the second branch is the ESA internal activities. There is an estimation of what can be done in terms of reduction of GHG emissions. The estimation of the other areas is undergoing, and the challenge number 2 has demonstrated that this is something that is really at stake, understanding what we are emitting. And the third one is about downstream activity. And then you have not only induced emission, we have not only something that is in addition to the current emission for implementing the activities, but we have a lot of avoided emissions in the downstream because of services, because of data which are available, because of applications which are improving the quality of our life. Next, please. How we can foster the space sector action in Europe first, but possibly all around the world. We thought, together with other key players, that a charter is a good instrument to be used. What the charter is for? The charter can bring together a community of entities, public, private organizations, which are thinking the same way, which have the same objective, which want to go in the same direction. So private and public sector, industry, operators, governments, or space agency, all together setting up common principles and values and agreeing on them and committing to work towards the implementation of those values and principles through their objectives and actions. We thought also that a simple governance structure would also be useful for the charter to maintain the momentum and to nurture the momentum of the objectives and the principle of the charter itself. This governance would help participants and signatories to go ahead with the implementation of the charter itself. The charter is not legally binding. It is on a voluntary basis, and this is open to all the entities which could make the difference in the space sector. Next, please. For the moment, we have built up this charter across two different signatory groups. As I said, the private sector with the space industry and the satellite operators, and the public sector with the space agencies at national level and the European Space Agency. The charter is very simple. It is built around 4 principles and 4 values. The principles are the fair, responsible governance of space activities, the fair access to a preserved and peaceful space, the preservation and the remediation of our natural environment on Earth, so not only space, but also the consequences on Earth, and a fair society and improvement of the well-being of all of us. The values of the Charter are integrity, identity and inclusiveness, creativity and curiosity, and excellence. What are the benefits that this kind of charter may bring to private signatories, for instance? Of course, is providing a common platform where all the legal obligations will be put together at European level, at local level, to better understand how to behave. They can learn and exchange professional development among partners. They can find expert knowledge and insights. They can communicate through the charter, and they can benefit of a networking and the community dealing with the same matters. On the public signature side, this is bringing a common understanding about targets to be set, a common access to the sustainability level and progress of the entire sector, so access to data and access to the concrete results, the possibility to establish standards and best practice guidelines, and the mapping and managing of risk along the supply chain, which is a concern of many actors. Next, please. What are the steps now to make this into reality? Currently, we are having meetings of potential signatories to refine the charter structure and, above all, the governance of the structure. We have around 30 potential signatories that are working together during those weeks, because the idea is, as I was announced by the Director General of ESA, to have the signature or the first event of signature of the Charter at the COP26 United Nations Climate Change Conference, which will be taking place in Glasgow in November 2021. So this is a signature event. We are going to take the opportunity to have the International Astronautical Conference in Dubai in October to have a public announcement and holding a roundtable about the charter, so to be able to attract potential signatories and to illustrate how the charter has taken its final shape. Around the table, we will have National Space Agency, industries, operators, and possibly also high-level representatives of ESA. So for the moment, this is ending my presentation. I thank you. I invite you to contact me if you need more information about the charter itself. And of course, I'm now open for answering to your questions and listening to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that talk. We have got questions for you coming in on the Q&A. So if you have a question for Andrea, please type it in the Q&A box. Andrea, you can just click reply and answer those questions. We're running a bit behind on time. So if you wouldn't mind replying, Andrea, to the Q&As, we'll move on to the next session, which is the Value of Space panel. That's going to be led by Neil Ray, the head of space at consultancy company KPMG. So Neil, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Susie. Hopefully everyone can see me. And I'm going to introduce now our other panelists. We've got about half an hour, 20 minutes of questions that I'll put to the panelists, and then 10 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. And I think Dallas and Susie are going to help me pull together a set of questions from everyone. So if I may, I'll introduce everyone one by one. So beginning with Catherine Mealing-Jones, who is Director of Growth at the UK Space Agency. And she leads the agency's work to grow the UK space sector, including strategy development of new uses, technologies and attitudes to space, and fostering the development of regional and local space industry clusters. Next, Luca Budello, who is the Geospatial Knowledge Manager at Knowledge Transfer Network. And he helps innovators to overcome challenges and create new opportunities for organizations to understand the value of geospatial insights. Next, Donna Lindsay. So Donna is the Innovation Lead at Ordnance Survey and also Vice Chair of the Space for Climate Group, which is putting the UK at the forefront of global efforts to use trusted satellite data for climate action. She's a leading innovator and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society with over 30 years experience of geospatial and Earth observation industry. And next, Rob Desborough. So Rob is a partner at Seraphim Space Fund and is Chief Executive Officer of Seraphim Space Camp, which is one of the world's leading accelerator programs for space tech startups, with over 20 years of venture capitalist experience, and having also studied at both Glasgow and Strathclyde universities, so strong background in Scotland. And then lastly, Dr. Richard Dixon, who is Director of Friends of the Earth Scotland, but also, as he mentioned on one of the earlier calls, has a PhD in astrophysics, so combining both understanding of space, but also with a long history of work on the environment. So welcome to all the panelists. Delighted to have such breadth and depth of knowledge on the call. So if I may, I'm going to kick off with a question about the exploitation really of space technology elsewhere. So what opportunities do you see for the application of technology and business insight from the space sector to other sectors as they also grapple with climate change and sustainability? And perhaps we could begin with Dr. Richard Dixon from that point of view.
Thanks very much. So I think there are a lot of crossovers, and we've talked about the other direction. We've talked about a just transition from the oil sector and using people with skills coming in here. So if you're currently an electrical engineer in the oil and gas sector, why couldn't you be an electrical engineer in the space sector? So lots in that direction, but transferring the other direction, I think obviously there are lots of areas, but one that occurs to me is about communications. So communications of very complex and sometimes very weak signals is an important part of what the space industry does. And at the moment, if you live in rural Sutherland in the north of Scotland, you probably don't have very good connectivity compared to someone in central Edinburgh, although sometimes it's the other way around. Let's fix that, but let's also fix that for rural Malawi. So let's connect up the world so that they are benefiting from communications that develops in the space industry, but they're also contributing to the information that the space industry collects for the global good by being in communication.
Brilliant, thank you, Richard. Catherine, I'm thinking that from your point of view, you've probably got quite a lot to add around the sector and both the business models that might be emerging in the sector, but also the exploitation of its technologies.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take my answer in a slightly different direction, because I think there's lots of people on the panel who can talk about, all the different applications and, the different ways that you can use space technology and sort of progress in the space sector to enhance, what we're doing on climate change and sustainability elsewhere. I suppose one of the things that I reflect on is, we're waiting now for the publication of the government's first national space strategy, due reasonably imminently. And one of the concepts behind that is to start to take a whole of government approach to our strategy for space. So, recently, both MOD and BEIS, our parent department for the UK Space Agency, have really stepped up their policy interactions. A number of other players that, like DEFRA, are absolutely now tied into the National Space Council, chaired at prime ministerial level. So I think, the opportunity I see is that whole of government view. Previously, we looked at projects and, did kind of pilot programs and things, which came up with solutions in this area. But this much wider view that's being taken of space by government gives an opportunity for space thinking and space solutions to be completely baked into the government's framework approach to space. So, I feel quite optimistic actually that, as government policy makers and decision takers are thinking about the big issues, how we get to net zero, how we meet some of our most challenging goals, and how we get, greener, cleaner society going, we'll be doing that in an integrated way. So that, that's the opportunity I see, I think, from a government perspective.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Catherine. Perhaps Donna, you might also be able to share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I sort of sit on two camps, I suppose. So on one side, I see that the excellence, and we've seen it here today as well, the excellence in the science we have and in the analytics community. And then on the other side, I see the 4 million users that Ordnance Survey has. And it's how do we connect these pieces together? How do we enable that information to flow to the people who need to use it? So, for example, we have 6,000 public sector bodies who utilize our data, Ordnance Survey's data. But actually, they would really struggle to obtain the information that's provided by satellite data. So how can we connect these things together, and how can we make it very easy for them to use and access and understand? Because I think what we forget as technologists is actually it's quite a high barrier for people to get over, to understand and to access the information. So I think there's some real value there that we can actually derive and pull through. And if we can really start upskilling people, getting them to understand what is the potential of this information to help them, address some of these big challenges, I think is really, really key. And I think certainly from the other side of the room, if you like, from the Space for Climate side, is that we're really, trying to pull together all these expertise from academia, from SMEs, from corporates, and from government to see how we can actually pull together and collaborate effectively to then come up with these sustainable business models. Because again, I think that's a real challenge, and it came up earlier today. I think it was Sue that mentioned it. What are those barriers to really push this through? How can we get those sustainable business models that means that they're not grant related? They've actually got an underpinning financial support. So I think there's a number of things there. Certainly we need to grow in terms of skill sets for those business models, but also enabling sort of like that education piece and the ability to flow the information across.
Great. Thank you, Donna. And Rob, I imagine from your point of view, you must see a lot of new ideas coming through right at the leading edge of that. Do you see any in particular that could contribute more broadly? You're on mute.
We exist as a venture fund because of the market applications and the opportunities there, and to solve some of the global challenges that face us, then you need a space-derived solution. And currently, there's about 8 billion per annum is being invested by space venture capitalists into space startups. And probably about half of that is being invested into data companies. So satellite constellations, covering everything from those companies looking at radio frequency management, radar, infrared, multispectral imaging, optical sensing. So there's a very significant market opportunity from the venture capital perspective. We're starting to see the first billion-dollar unicorn startups in that sector as well. So looking at companies like Spire, and there's going to be fast followers like Hawkeye 360 coming along. But space has the opportunity to address issues around greenhouse gas monitoring. So we're looking at companies like GHG Sat there, looking at methane detection. In terms of food security and traceability, Hawkeye 360 is playing a role there. Orbital Insights as well, ISI as well, which is another potential unicorn company as well. Looking at supply and demand optimization as well, and the impact that we can have on the logistics industry. Planet plays a big role there. SPAR plays a big role in maritime tracking, aviation tracking. Looking at renewable energy as well. Satellite View, a UK startup, is looking at thermal detection, and that has, we can manage climate impact, but also that has an impact on financial services as well. Looking at resource mapping, Lunasonde is looking at identifying aquifers subsurface as well. So we're seeing some really exciting startups globally, particularly in the US, Europe, and the UK. And the UK is probably right now the third leading company in the world for satellite constellations after the US and China. So it's an exciting time to be a VC.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Rob. Luca, could I ask you to lead off on our next question, which is Earth observation data from space feels like a really critical component of addressing climate change. Do you think this is being fully exploited at present?
Well, no, I don't think so. And the issues, the reason are very complex. And well, we could spend hours, I think, to grapple with the many barriers that hinder the EO segment, the Earth observation segment of space to become a mature sector of the economy. I think Lindsay just mentioned one, which is data accessibility, data transformation, data delivery, business models is another one. We need to develop a more vertical business model that address the needs of specific community. But the one I like to focus on perhaps in this question is in the words of Aravind Ravichandra, I think he said something like, we want to solve problems using satellite data, not hoping for satellite data to solve problems. And this is kind of show the EO sector being very technology push rather than market pull. We focus on creating new technology, new sensors. We find the excitement of putting small sats in space, and this is very exciting. But we then hope that we can use that data to solve problems. And I think we need to start focusing on problems first, and then use the technology to resolve that problem. And mentioning another person, Marianna Mazzucato, and in her words, is developing mission-oriented innovation approach might be a way to focusing on grand challenges like climate change, like tackling inequalities, and the all various SDG, and focus on creating missions. And these missions can be used to define innovation pathways that create disruptive innovation, for which Earth observation data and the expertise of delivering insight from this data can be used to resolve challenges and have a much more vertical approach.
Brilliant, thank you, Luca. That's very helpful. Donna, do you perhaps have some thoughts around, Luca mentioned in particular there being barriers to adoption, barriers to getting it to a place where people are genuinely deriving insight. Could you perhaps share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we also see similar challenges actually in the geospatial community, because it tends to sort of talk to itself quite a lot. So we forget that actually a lot of our end users aren't with us in terms of the terminology, in terms of the language, and actually in terms of the capability of what this data and insights can deliver to them. So I think we still have barriers there in terms of, you know, enabling people to really understand what we're trying to achieve here and what we're trying to help them with. I think to go to Luca's point, you know, again, you know, we really need to be able to be that problem focused, you know, entity, I guess, you know, and certainly from our point of view, you know, how can we really drill down into those problems to make sure we're not just pushing data at them, that we actually are solving those problems and helping them, you know, address things like their, you know, the climate challenges and the resilience challenges that they're facing. So again, I think that's really important. Some of the challenges I think we face, and I'll probably be shot down in flames for this, but I think, you know, the multitude of platforms that have appeared, it's quite confusing for people as to where to go for information. And I think it was quite interesting when we were talking about a catalogue of catalog earlier. You know, actually, you know, it is really hard for people to find the information they need, and also to know that it's the right information that they have, you know, and how they should be using it. So I think we do need to be really cautious about that going forward, particularly with the science that we've got at our fingertips. So I think as an industry, we need to be very mindful of that actually we have massive power and capability in our hands with the insights, but actually how do we translate that to make sure that people can use it to the best effect?
Brilliant. Okay, that's really helpful. Richard, could you perhaps build on that a little bit from a kind of, I suppose, in a sense, an end user point of view, in terms of what you see going on from an environmental point of view? Do you think people ask the right questions of the data and know what's available to them?
I think there's a lot of ignorance about what data is actually out there. There's a huge amount of data. Some of it we've been using for decades. So the data that tells us about the temperature of the Earth's surface and the oceans, we've been using that satellite data for decades. That's really fundamental. A lot of people don't know that some of that data is coming, most of that data is coming from satellites. We are involved in a project just looking at muir burn, so the burning of heather on grace moors. And again, satellite data could be really crucial. There's an issue about accessibility, about understanding it exists, about the cost of accessing it. So there are some issues about access. But first of all, you've got to think, oh yes, satellites might be the answer. And I think a lot of people don't do that yet. But another aspect I wanted to just mention about the power of space data is about the visuals. So many people are familiar with that picture taken from Apollo 8 of the Earth rising above the limb of the moon. And that's been described as one of the most powerful pictures of the 20th century, in that it made people think about our small planet. And people do get, you know, the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's really true. And so when you see an animation of satellite data showing you 20 years of the North's polar ice cap getting smaller and smaller every summer, that's really much more powerful than seeing a graph or someone describing that to you. So I think there's a real big untapped set of comparison pictures showing us, here's what it used to be like, here's what it's like now, here's the forest that's disappeared, here are the ice caps that disappeared, here's the desert that's advanced. So I think that's an area where there's a huge amount of really useful data out there, but people haven't gathered it and presented it in a way which would be really powerful for the ordinary person.
Thanks very much, Richard. That's fantastic, actually, in terms of that visualization to tell a story. Catherine, would you mind leading on our I think we'll make this our sort of final question before we take questions from the floor. So as the space sector grows in the UK, how should it do this in a way that is mindful of the environment? And what opportunities and skills requirements does this growth present?
Thanks. I'm going to be cheeky and just add a little bit onto that last question as well. And that, you know, I know Donna and, you know, through the Space for Climate grouping are looking very hard at, you know, what we do on the government role in sort of taking a view about making data accessible, and also how we work to provide quality assurance behind data. I think that's really key. And if you do stuff like that, you get visualizations like the expansion and contraction of the polar ice caps, which, a bit like the image of the Earth from space, are very, very powerful reminders of the kind of climate impacts, you know, just as one example. But so as we grow in the UK, I think being mindful of the environment, I think there are a few things. Again, I'll kind of talk a bit from a government perspective. I think, first of all, that integration into wider government policy. So, you know, looking at alternative sources of power, for example, and how that might take us on a different kind of roadmap, which will tackle other environmental sustainability points along the way. So, you know, it's a bit controversial, but, you know, solar power from space could give us a roadmap, which also helped us to tackle some of the orbital debris stuff. I think baking in environmental considerations into lawmaking, we've done it with the Space Industry Act. We also are starting to do it with standards for new space and that sort of thing. I think, you know, incentivizing, again, from a government perspective through grant making and so on, environmental considerations, sustainability and so on can really help. I think making sure that we get the right broad panel of advice. I mean, some of our most successful partnerships, and again, you know, things like Space for Climate, SSLC itself, you know, brings together a huge range of expertise. I think it's, you know, really welcome. This conference has brought together some different voices, you know, with different perspectives, not necessarily all agreeing, but trying to meet the same aim. I think that's how we bake it in. And then in terms of skills, I think that will really start to pull things in from some of the adjacent industries and, you know, and get us onto the right kind of track.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Rob, you might perhaps have some thoughts around how we grow and how we grow in a way that is respectful of the environment, bearing in mind, of course, the need to make a return as well, and that often being a driver, right?
Well, I think from our perspective, we're very driven now by ESG considerations in all of our investments, and that driver is coming from those people who we raise money from for our own funds. So we're going through an active fundraising process at the moment, and it's been critical for us to go through and demonstrate that all of our portfolio are addressing ESG considerations there. And I think it's critical that we as an investor, as we put up satellites, we better manage how to remove them in the future, and how we can also invest into companies that can map the space domain, like Leo Labs, and, you know, work with companies, as I know the UK is working with Astroscale, looking at space debris removal technologies as well. So I think it's we all recognise the opportunity, and it's just how we manage that, and that's going to be led by people who are investing into funds like us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Luca, I was wondering if you might be able to sort of take the skills angle on that question. So in terms of, as you yourself are working with innovators, do you see skills gaps that need to be addressed, particularly around the environmental impact? Oh, and you're on mute.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yes, there is a skill gap. I work primarily on the EO segment of the space sector, so I cannot really address the upstream, but I think there are similar kind of issues. The space sector, the EO segment sector, the wider location data community tend to be the domain of geoinformaticians, so technical people. In one way, we need to create the opportunity for bringing more business people within the sector, so that we can address issues related to how we're going to change the business model to deliver this data and make it available to create more vertical specific solutions. So how do we going to create the incentives for what are usually high caliber, high paid individuals to enter the sector and look at space data or geospatial as an opportunity to create innovation, to create new opportunity to tackle the global challenges and make a return. The challenges are many, and we need to bring more people within the sector in order to address all these challenges, for sure.
Brilliant, Luca. Thank you very much indeed. I think we'll draw close to my questions there, because I think we're just over 20 minutes in terms of that conversation. But Dallas and Susie, I think you've probably got some questions for us from the floor.
Neil, your timekeeping is impeccable. I just want to say that. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're actually running slightly over time, I'm afraid, and not your fault at all, completely our fault for that. So I think there's 1 or 2 questions in the Q&A box, so we're not going to do the questions sort of formally, publicly now. But if anyone wants to have a little dive into the Q&A box now and see what's there and try and answer those if you can. Thank you so much for all your points and all your questions. And also your questions were so good and so beautifully answered. We have no more questions, quite honestly. So thank you very much, Neil and the panel. We're going to move on, if that's okay, to our sort of final discussion. And of course, as a sector, the space industry needs to lead by example, but also it's very, very important to follow other examples. And we've got the Scotch Whisky Association sustainability journey now. And I want to introduce Morag Garden, who's going to talk us through her own and their own story with regards to environmentalism and sustainability. So Morag, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry we're a wee bit late.
That's okay.
And it's all yours. The floor's all yours.
Thank you. So thanks very much for inviting me today. And what time to be working in sustainability in Scotland. We've got Scotland's government has declared that climate emergency with a public promise to act on global warming, and they've got the ambitious 2040 net zero carbon target has been set, and Glasgow's hosting COP26 later this year. So it's all go. So I'm really proud to be here today and present to you on how the Scotch whisky sector is playing its part in Scotland's response to the global climate emergency. Over the next 50 minutes, I will hopefully be able to explain to you why, as a sector, our ambition is to be environmental leaders, how we're evolving to minimise our impact, and what sustainability actions are we undertaking in Scotland's glens, mountains and rivers. I don't quite know how to, oh yeah. Before I take you into this journey, I just wanted to highlight that around 36 bottles are shipped overseas every second for Scotch whisky. So at the end of this talk, 30,000 bottles will have left Scotland's shores. Next slide. So as you can see from this excerpt, Scotch whisky is over 500 years old. And this record is stating, by the order of King James IV, 8 bowls of malt, so that's 8 scoops of malt, were given to monk friar John Corr to produce aqua vitae. And we think that John Corr lived in Lindores Abbey in Fife. And so Lindores has been known as the spiritual home of Scotch whisky. So moving from the building blocks to global success. So how did we get from these humble beginnings all the way to be this global export icon? I think for me, there's kind of 4 areas. So firstly, in the 1880s, the French vineyards were devastated by a beetle infestation, which destroyed the cognac industry. But us canny Scots, we took advantage of this situation. And by the time they had recovered, Scotch whisky had replaced brandy as the preferred spirit of choice. Also during the 19th century, the titans of the whisky world, like James Buchanan, Tommy Dewar, Johnny Walker, James Shivis, they took Scotch out of Scotland into the world for the first time and sold it around the globe. There was also the rise of the grain whisky, which was the invention of the coffee still. And this enabled continuous distillation, which really changed the levels of whisky that we were able to produce. It also provided a lighter flavour of whisky, which gave that wider appeal. Finally, building our distilleries in Scotland's remote glens provided us with the necessary water source which we require, because Scotch is only made from cereals, water and yeast, but also had the added benefit of being hidden from the taxman. But obviously we're paying all our taxes now. So next slide. So just a very quick overview. This is our top 10 markets. And as you can see, our top market by value is the USA and by volume by France. And a couple of interesting facts is that the amount of Scotch enjoyed globally is as much as the US, Canadian and Irish whiskies combined. And as well as that, so more Scotch is drunk in France in a month than cognac in a year. That point was less appreciated at the last time I did this presentation, which was at a French Spirits Association. Okay, next slide. So this is just another kind of infographic to show you the overview of how we are within the world. As you can see, Europe as a third of the Scotch whisky market, but there are other key growing markets like Asia and South America. So overall, Scotch whisky exports are worth £3.8 billion in 2020. And in 2019, the Scotch whisky accounted for 75% of Scottish food and drinks and around 20% of all UK food and drinks exports. Next slide. But we're also a modern industry. So Scotland is a home to around 133 malt and grain distilleries, which makes the greatest concentration of distilleries in the world. And as I've said, we're made entirely in Scotland from cereals, water and yeast. We're distilled to retain a flavour derived from its raw materials, and it has to be matured for a minimum of 3 years in oak casks, but often considerably longer. And the other kind of key area here is we have very strict regulations which set out regions and categories. And we see this as an opportunity rather than a challenge. So under these very tight regulations, we still need to be able to innovate and minimise our environmental impacts. Next slide. So why did the Scotch whisky sector create a sustainability strategy? And this is kind of various reasons. So first of all, according to the United Nations International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have 9 years left to limit the climate change catastrophe. So that means industry, business, governments, we must demonstrate true leadership and be making some urgent changes to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Also, our consumers are demanding that companies provide sustainability-focused products. The current and future employees are also demanding it. In the 20th century, sort of business governance was focused around the shareholder, but very much now in this 21st century, it's all about stakeholders. We need to be working across our value chain, supply chain, our consumers, NGOs, etc., to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We also want to, it's just sensible business sense to future-proof our companies against the changing legislation, both at UK, EU, and also that international as well. And finally, it's an opportunity, once we have this strategy, to just really kind of create positive engagement across our members and as well as our wider stakeholders. And it's a real platform to help sort of shine a light on what our members and all the good activities and case studies they're up to. Next slide. So I keep getting asked this question, why the Scotch whisky sector have they been one of the first to develop our sector sustainability strategy and let's get all other sectors to follow us. And I feel that I need to sort of be truthful here, where I think we've got a few advantages over other sectors. So first of all, we collaborate. Scotch whisky is quite a lot of our product is a blend, and a blend can be up to 40 to 60 different whiskies in there. So no one company has that portfolio, that inventory to be able to be self-reliant. So there's a lot of sharing at that operational area in operational phase to share different whiskies and trade different casks. So the real kind of collaboration is built into the bricks for distilling. We also mature our product for a very long time. On average, it's 12 years, but considerably longer on many more. So there's a real sort of gap between the production phase and the hard-nosed selling at the consumer and at the supermarkets and at the consumer end. So I think that really gives us space to be able to be sort of open and collaborative, and we've made the environment non-competitive. Also, Scotch whisky and its brand is around the sense of place and Scotland and having a pristine environment. So we really see ourselves as custodians to the environment and want to be active in this area. So again, helping us come together to protect the environment. And as I say, history, we've been here for 500 years. To be called the Scotch whisky, the distillery, to be Tane Distillery, it has to stay in Tane, it has to be in the Tane community. And that's the same for all Scotch whisky sites. So we want to be here for another 500 years. So therefore, there's a real emphasis on making sure we protect our environment. Next slide. So we've been on this journey, and it's actually been over the last decade. So in 2009, we launched our first strategy and an environmental strategy as a sector. We have had quite a few progress reports. In 2016, we refreshed, and we have just gone a full review in 2020 and launched our new strategy in 21. but yeah, but as I say, we're not off the starting blocks, and we've been setting out our direction of travel since 2009. So here are our main themes that we created in 2021. So the 4 main themes continue to be fit for purpose and form the foundations of our sustainability ambition. Our strategy continues to be holistic and focusing on all aspects of the Scotch whisky operations. We have set challenging ambitions around carbon emissions, energy, water use, packaging, and caring for our land. And if we have time later, I can maybe go through these in a bit more detail. Next slide. So the only certainty we have in this strategy is that we have ambitions and solutions, and they will constantly change, and we don't have all the answers. We've created the hooks in our strategy, and this has helped, and this will help and has helped in focusing our discussions on some of the key challenges that we have to date. And we've committed these public pledges and action plans, but this is just very much the starting point. Next slide. So we're all in the same storm, but in different boats. Each member company is charting their own direction of travel to deal with the same sustainability issues. The SWA strategy is a hub, and it's aiming to equip our members with the right tools, the right guidance, and helping them make their own individual decisions to successfully deliver on their sustainability ambitions. The sum is definitely greater in its parts for our sector. Next slide. So the SWA has worked closely with its members to create this ambitious, robust, achievable strategy. Our members individually need to go on this journey, but they're not alone. And what we've discovered is no one size fits all. There's such value in the sector approaching it in a collaborative manner, because we have so many common challenges and we can identify these priority areas together. Also, the sustainability strategy is very much a living document, and it will constantly evolve. We kind of see it as like our North Star, and it will help the companies set out in the right direction of travel, but it will constantly change. It also allows us to be sustainability ambassadors, so we can come to meetings like this and show the value of why we think sustainability is good for business and help others on their journey, and that includes our supply chain. So core to this strategy is collaboration, leadership, and innovation. And overall, we think, you know, that sustainability should be voluntary, industry-led, and be flexible to be successful. And that's it. Thank you.
Morag, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. It was lovely to hear your story and lovely to hear your values. I mean, I don't know how much of the summit you've seen today, but for the space sector, which is obviously growing so massively in Scotland, what's your one bit of advice? Your one bit of, if you had one message to say to the Scottish Space Leadership Council, what would it be?
Gosh, I should have thought about this question beforehand.
Sorry, I just
I think I might come up with
talking.
I might come up with 2 or 3. So I think for me, which it's just kind of like, you know, in hindsight. So we made the environment non-competitive, and therefore that just allowed us to share best practice and cooperate with each other. And I think we did that without really thinking about it, because of that collaboration that we have anyway. And I think that has been a real value and unique. And so I think we hold that more precious now than perhaps we did at the beginning. I think coming up with solutions or ambitions that you don't know the answers to, I think is okay, as long as you're very honest about it. I told a story previously about how we went to see Richard when we first set out our strategy. And, you know, just having those honest conversations and learning from others was definitely really valuable. But so just being honest and saying, we don't know the answer, but we know this is the right way to do it. And there's so many people who will come and help you get to there. And don't get hung up on, and this is my personal one probably, don't get hung up on the data and the details. You know, you've got to measure it, you've got to manage it, but you could spend a lot of time working out how to be perfect about that. And yes. And so we're also showing how we are successful through examples, as well as having a data set. And it will be a data set, it will be robust, but we're also going to show it through best practice, case studies, examples, showing those kind of things and letting others follow on that as well.
I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, perfection is the enemy of done. Yeah, really, really good. And also actually just, you know, setting yourself up as custodians of the environment, I think you said, is just such a brilliant phrase. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Morag. But we're going to have to move on. We've come to the end of our time.
Okay.
But again, thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak today.
Yeah, it's been great.
No, absolutely. So the final thing on our program today is we're going to have sort of some closing words. And our closing words are going to be from John Innes, former chair of the Scottish Space Leadership Council.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's worked so tirelessly to make this Sustainable Space Summit possible. To Dallas and Susie for keeping everybody on track, to our speakers and to our panelists today. But I'd also particularly like to thank the judges and workstream leads and participants in the Sustainability Challenge itself, and particularly to the environmental sector for providing the challenges in the first place. From its inception, the Scottish Space Leadership Council and the space industry which it represents has placed sustainability and environmental protection at its core. As a young entrepreneurial sector, space in the UK approaches its work with a new generation of attitudes and motivations in contrast to those held by more traditional industries of past generations. The UK space industrial sector is keen to ensure that it plays a significant role in sustainability and the protection of the planet. From the beginning, SSLC was keen to do more than simply have just another environmental conference. Approaching the environmental sector to ask for challenges and it's more than just trying to greenwash the sector. It is, we hope, the genuine beginning of a comprehensive effort by the Council to not only maintain sustainability at the heart of the sector, but to ensure it is one of the central tenets of the UK space sector. This summit is the beginning of that effort, and the SSLC Environmental Task Force will pick up from here to address the challenges in partnership with our friends in the environmental sector. Sustainability and the protection of the environment is not simply a set of slogans or a badge. It is an essential part of ensuring the success and growth of the UK space industry. I hope this initiative and the positive interactions and contacts which have formed through the challenges will be reflected more widely and potentially become part of or a driving force of a future space strategy. I'd like to close by expressing my personal thanks to Christina Taman and to Daniel Smith, who have from the beginning of this initiative provided its energy, momentum and heart. Without their efforts, this sustainability challenge would not have happened, and all of the clear and significant value which we've seen demonstrated today would have been lost. Thank you for attending today, and I look forward to the next steps in these challenges.
Great, so we've come to the end of our programme. As we mentioned earlier, if anybody would like to be involved in moving forward with these questions, you can contact the leads for the workshops, or you can contact directly the Scottish Space Leadership Council. There's some details in the chat there, the admin at scottishspace.org, or via the scottishspace.org website. So if you got intrigued by the discussions that we've had today, please don't hesitate to reach out to the SSLC and get involved, because as we said at the very beginning, this is not the end, simply the beginning of the conversation. So please do go ahead and do that. And we'd like to say some really big thank yous to everybody, again, echoing thanks there from John to Daniel, to the SSLC, to all those who organised this event. It's taken a lot of organisation, to everybody that took part in panels, the judges for the questions, and also, of course, the leads for the 3 questions who put in so much work and ran those workshops. So a massive thank you to everybody.
Yeah, and thank you to you for logging on and sticking with us over the last few hours. It's been wonderful, and thank you so much. And I hope that you've been educated, informed, and inspired to take this subject a bit further. So on behalf of myself and Susie, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.